Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Masterclass Mondays after our short summer break. I'm happy that you are here. I guess that some of you are here again and you made the best out of the break time and repeated some content. Whatever you made in the break in between, we are now getting started with more development related topics. And today, this webinar will be represented by Rudolf Leberfinger, our head of GUI services, and myself from communication side. Today, we focus on GUI architecture and want to give you some examples how to best build your architecture underlying your embedded system. Okay, I already want to hand over to Rudolf now, and let's getting it started.
Thank you, Christine, for the pleasant introduction. And welcome to everybody joining today's episode 7 of our Masterclass Mondays. We now want to show you, as Christine already mentioned, a typical GUI architectures and give you some examples for this. That means how you structure your user interface. And here I want to show you in today's session the all-in-one architecture, which means to handle all parts of a GUI within one single group. That's a quite easy architecture, useful for small user interfaces, but also quite simple to achieve this goal and to handle it. A second example will be a full-stack architecture. This architecture uses the dialog stacking with the included dialog framework to structure your user interface. That's also quite useful, especially if you want to have here screens which have transparency one to each other, or if you have a very lean design with a good back navigation. And the third example I want to show you today is an example using a managed screens approach. That means here I want to show you how you can use containers to manage layered screens and what does it mean for your GUI architecture. Yeah, let's get started with this. And for this, I want to start together with you a new Embedded Wizard project. So I switch over to Embedded Wizard and just create a new project. The new project, it's Masterclass episode 7. And within this project, we now want to start with the first example, and I want to present you an all-in-one user interface. What does it mean? You have your unit application, and inside your application, you want to create a user interface which is quite simple, and in our example, let's say it will have 3 different screens. It will have a boot screen, a home screen, and a settings screen. So first of all, let's give our application a background to define what's visible in the back. So I just put in here a rectangle, make it full screen. That's our background. And now let's think about booting the device. What might be done during booting? Maybe let's say there will be any progress bar showing you the boot progress. For this, I simply go to our widgets, and within the widgets, let's select a horizontal value bar, present it somewhere in the middle, and let's say this shall be now our boot progress. Okay. That's for the boot. But what we want to show when boot is done. And when boot is done, let's show a home screen. And within the home screen, let's say we just want to do some measurement. We want to have here a measurement device. And for measurement, typically, let's display, for example, a gauge, which is showing here some measured values. And as well, such a measurement process can be started. So let's add also one button, and let's say this is a button called start to start a measurement. Yeah, that's all now for the home screen. But in addition, maybe for this device, you also need some settings menu. So for the settings menu, to reach the settings, for sure, you would need some settings button. Let's place somewhere then a button which leads you to your settings. Yeah, and when you press settings, a settings menu should appear. So how to present a settings menu? Settings menu maybe might have first of all a button which brings you back from the settings. So want to have one back button, and then in additional a settings menu which has here some menu entries, like let's say one entry which is a date time setting, then a second entry which maybe would have some calibration, and maybe let's say a third entry which just gives you possibility of a language selection. Oh, sorry, it's a typo. I want to tap language. Okay. Yeah, and for sure then when you type inside, you can go deep and deep and deeper in the menu, but that's all I want to show you in this simple example to present you the way how to do this all in one architecture. You have now all these parts available just by putting it simply into your application itself. That's a group, and all parts belong to the group here. But in principle, you do not want to have everything visible at a time. And therefore, you could add a simple state machine, which is then handling what's visible at a time. And to do this, adding a state machine, I do this via an internal property. And here the property, I just say that's my current screen. Yeah. What does it mean with the current screen? This current screen just defines which screen to select. And to make it a little bit more readable, not just use an integer, I want to create here an enumeration which defines which the screens I could use. So this enumeration, I type here that's my screen type. And inside the enumeration, I just have here already a few items prepared. So 3 items I can reuse immediately. And I would say the first one is my boot screen type. The second one is my home. And the third one, that's my settings. Now I have a type which contains these 3 parts. I have it in a better readable way, and I can use directly here inside a property my application screen type. And as a default, when the whole stuff starts, I simply say it starts with the boot itself. Yeah, the get, it's not really needed, so I just need the on set current screen. And now that's the part which is really essential. Whenever you change here the current screen, you also can define what should be done in terms of visibility for all your members. That means I have here my horizontal value bar, which I want to present during the boot phase. So therefore I say horizontal value bar dot visible. This remains to my current screen equals application screen type boot. With adding this simple line, it means this horizontal value bar is only visible when the current screen equals boot. Yeah, and now that's not only the visibility, I have a few more properties where I have to take care on. It's one, the visibility, and a second one that's important, it's the enabled property, and the enabled property that's responsible also to get the events like touch events or also key events, so to obtain the focus and then handle key events. And I do want to hide it completely, so also it should not be able to take care on any events. That means for my horizontal value bar, I also have simply to say that also the enabled is true when my current screen equals boot. Yeah, that's now to present this, but I have to do the same for all other things. So that means when I'm then on my home part, then I have here my settings button visible equals to, and I just can simply use here the copy and paste, screen type equals home. Yeah, and now I'm much faster with simply doing here some copy. So for this one I also do the enable state. Then I have to check which one else I have on my home. It's here this gauge. So I simply say the gauge and also copy my enabled. This belongs to home and as well as the start. So I simply copy it and add it here. And now these three parts belongs to current screen equals home. Good. I have done the home part and now I simply do the next part. And the next part, that's then the menu part. And for the menu part I have 4 different items. So I first say that the back part, back button, visibility and the enable state, it's set when the current screen belongs to settings. And I do the same for all other buttons belonging to the settings. And now I can simply copy here the stuff. I prefer here doing a copy and paste to be sure I do not have any typos in. That's the easiest way of dealing with it. Yeah, and that is all I have to do for 3 different screens. And for sure you see that some blocks, in principle I also can encapsulate this whole stuff into some separate methods. Then I just have to assign one value and can group it to different parts. But that's the way I prefer to do it for simple applications. If it's a little bit more, I can separate the stuff. This implementation, now I can prototype. So it means I start the prototyper with the application class. What I see everything in the beginning. Why? Because nothing is directly assigned here. To do this, I first have also to call my init method and let assign first one value to my current screen. And therefore, going back, because I already did this with boot, I prefer also to have here some undefined thing. So I also say here one screen is undefined. Bring this one to the bottom, so then it's the first enumeration value. That's sometimes quite good. For embedded wizard it doesn't matter, but for some middleware that might be important. Going back here, say that the current screen by default is undefined, and then in my init method just say that current screen becomes application screen type boot. What happens now? When I instantiate here my application, the init method will get called, and here I assign now boot to the current screen property. That means that in the current screen, the onset current screen is called, and in here I do not only assign the value, I'm also doing the rest. Besides of doing it here, you also can do this within the invalidate view state method or have a separate slot for it. But for a simple example, that's an easy way to show you the functionality. Okay, now I can also add here a breakpoint. So I toggle the breakpoint and prototype, and you see that this one is now assigned. And when stepping into, I directly go to the onset current screen method, and here now I really also can step over, and I see that really all these things are set. Yeah, and then when I continue, I see it starts with the boot. That's fine. Now I have my boot screen, but it still do not have here any progress. How to realize this now with the progress? In a very, very easy way, I could say that the progress just here can be handled with a timer. And I not really use a timer directly. I already use an effect which belongs then to my progress bar. And let's say that's my boot effect. And this boot effect might have a cycle duration of 2 seconds for the boot time, or simply 1 second or 1.5 seconds, which I can define. I say enabled by default is true because I'm starting with the boot. And now, quite important, I have to combine an effect with my bar, and I simply do this with the outlet property. And I can say that's my horizontal value bar current value, and then that's fine. And at the end, I just say what are the values. It should be from 0 to 100 to have it in percent. What does it mean? It means within a timing of 1.5 seconds, it increases a value from 0 to 100, and via the outlet, this value change is presented in my horizontal value bar. And then, after this is done, something should happen. And how to do this? You see that also here for this effect there is an unfinished slot property where I can really assign any slot. And this I want to do. So therefore with my Cora, I just use a slot and I give him a proper name. And this proper name, I would say that's an go to home. Inside my effect, now I say unfinished. What should happen? Go to home. Yeah, that means at the end of the effect, this slot is called. And now, the interesting thing, how to switch here to the home screen. I simply say that my current screen becomes application screen type home. That should be enough. Okay, let's test this. To test this, I start the prototyper. Yeah, I already can here toggle the breakpoint. It's not needed anymore. Continue. Ah, I see that's not completed because it does not really have here a one-shot cycle. It's currently number of cycles 0. I need one of cycles 1, so it just increases once and then also it will end. So prototype again. Yeah, I see when I start it increases and at the end I'm on my home screen. Good, that's fine. That's how to switch to the home screen. But now I want to do something here with my settings button. How to do this? I have now a method which says go to home. I just copy it and say go to settings, and within the slot I simply say that my current screen becomes the settings. That's all for the settings. And from the settings I also want to go back to my home. So that means not needed at all because I already have a go to home. So I can also use this. And how to do this? I have a settings button. inside the settings button, I would say here that within the on activate, I have a go to settings, and on my back button on activate, I have a go to home. Yeah, and now let's prototype if this works. I'm on the boot phase, now I'm on my home, and when I press settings, then I'm here on the settings, and when I press back, then I'm back on my home. Yeah, that's it. And in principle, now for any date button, you can switch here to some views which are then related to switching the date time. With calibration, you would be able to do your calibration or your language selection or whatever. That's the all-in-one architecture. All members of your user interface, you just put it into your application and then just check the visibility and the enabled state. Yes, but now that's an easy way. I would recommend to do this for small user interfaces. You're very fast to implement it, but you also see here you get in more and more elements, and with a certain complexity, then you can no longer find anything within your application. Then you need some more sophisticated structure. Yes, let's do this, give it a little bit more structure. How to do this? I switch back here to my agenda, so that was the all-in-one, and now I want to show you the full stack GUI architecture using dialog stacking. Let's go back. I go back into my application. I simply make now a copy of this, and they then say that's my application all in one. I have all this now copied because maybe I want to reuse something, and to have some better readability inside here, I use really here also the annotations of embedded wizard and group the whole stuff. So I have this for my current work time, and then here that's my all-in-one, and I also can say that's all-in-one, and I remember that belongs to the all-in-one stuff. Yeah, here that's my current app, and later on I will rename to what we already are doing. Yeah, I said I want to have here now this full stack architecture. What does I mean with full stack? I want to stack separate screens. But before I can stack them, I also really need some separate screens. Okay, and to use some separate screens, or let's do it in a different way. Let's here say at the top, that's my all-in-one. And let's have here a second where I just say that's my full stack. Yeah, and in the full stack, I have my application. And with my application, creating now the separate screens, I want to show you how to do this. So I simply go to the component templates, copy here one template, and can say that this is now one of my screens. And to do this, let's say that's my screen. But I have a few screens which maybe have some similar functionality in. So I create here a screen base as a base class for all of my screens, which gives much better structure for the whole user interface. And what's then inside this base class? Some things I do not need from the component templates, but what I have to say that all my screens are full screen. So I had here a 640 by 480 screen. And now all my screens, if they are derived from the screen base, they have this dimension. A second thing I want to have is a background. So the same as I did before, I simply add here a background rectangle, and that's now common for all of my screens. And I also can give him a little bit different color to see that here a little bit different background is used. Make it a little bit of blue, for example. Maybe it's too dark. Give it something which is more like a white, but a little bit of blue. Okay, and now derived from this base screen, and here I really prefer also, instead of taking it from here, to use the modifier keys. So to press Ctrl Shift and just drag and drop with the mouse a derived class. You see that the screen base 1, it's derived from application screen base. Also you see it here within the inspector, it's derived from application screen base. And I would name this, that's my boot screen. And the same, I simply can copy, it's for my home screen, and it's for my settings screen. Make here my group a little bit bigger. Then you see everything is in here. And now I want to fill out what's inside the boot. So I go into my boot and I have to fill something in. Going to the application where I still have copied the whole stuff. I now use my horizontal value bar together with the boot effect and with the go to home, because this all I needed within my boot screen. And I just copy, go to my boot screen and paste again. So I have it in. And my go to home, this will not work. I just comment out for the moment. Okay. Going one back, I have also the home screen. Inside the home screen, what I will need is here my gauge and my start button and my settings and my go to settings slot. I simply copy the whole stuff, go to my home screen and I paste it. Have everything in here, and for the settings the same, I first comment out the stuff. Next, go to the application. Yeah, I need this part. Yeah, first enter settings, go back to application, copy everything I need for my settings, and here for the back I also assigned the go to home, so I will copy this also. Copy, I do it with a shortcut because that's more efficient. Then go to the settings and paste the whole stuff. And also in here with the go to home, I simply comment out this stuff because it will not work at all at the moment. I have now separated this all-in-one architecture into 3 different screens which are presented in 3 different classes. So settings, home and boot. And now I want to stack it. So I want to establish here a full stack architecture. And how can I achieve this? Going back to this application, I see that the whole stuff here, that's not really needed anymore. And yes, I have still my current screen, but do I need this? Not really at the moment. But let's keep this in. And here with the boot effect, it's not needed. Go to home is not needed. Go to settings is not needed. And in the init, and that's now important, I want here really to do this part with the boot screen. But with the stack, the whole stacking is managing then my current screen behavior. So I can remove this part. And I simply can say in the init that I do call a function of our dialog framework. And what I want to use here is the present dialog to add here a new dialog to a dialog stack. And which dialog I want to add? That's a new application boot screen. And then with the dialog framework, I also can use a huge set of transitions, so present transition, dismiss transition, overlay transition, which is really powerful. But for this simple example, that's not needed at all. So I simply would add here a null, so no transition is used. And the last parameter that's in these dialog functions, it's always the combine, which is a Boolean parameter, and I say that's false. Okay, what will happen now? When I instantiate my new GUI application, I enter the init and it makes a present dialog of a new boot screen. This I can test. I start the prototyping and I see immediately there is the boot screen. You see it's this little bit of blue background and the progress, and also the copy defect is working. Let's take a look on the boot screen. Yeah, that's fine, and here we have the go to home. And in a full stack application, how to deal with this go to home. Go to home should present a home screen, but that's now not the screen type itself. I directly can say it would enter it. And if I would do here now a stacking, I do not want really to stack now a home screen into my boot screen. I want to stack it on top of my boot screen. And this I can do by stack it to the owner of the boot screen. That means application added a boot screen directly to itself, and the boot screen can add a next screen on top of itself on the application side, so they are siblings then. And how to do this? I say here if owner not equal null. So if any owner exists, then owner, and here I just say present dialog if I want really to stack it on top of. But a boot principle, I don't need to go back to any boot screen. So instead of present the dialog, I also can say here a switch to dialog, which gives you great flexibility in using the dialog framework. And here what I want to switch to is a new application home screen. And the same as before, the transitions are not really needed at this point, so therefore I just make them null. And the last parameter, like before, that's a Boolean, it's false. Okay, let's test. Let's check if this really works. I start the prototyper. The boot progress is there. After boot progress is over, it calls the method go to home. Inside here there is an owner switch to dialog with a new home screen, and this new home screen is presented. Okay, that's fine. What's important now? The home screen is presented with a switch to dialog. That means the boot screen disappears already from memory. To see this, I can go to my RAM window, and in my RAM usage window, I will see what's currently inside my RAM, and I see if there is an application and a home screen and no application boot screen at all. So the boot screen that was in before, and it means there was a peak, it was instantiated once, but after the garbage collector was in, it removed the boot screen, it was no longer part of the dialog stack, and therefore it's out of the memory. Perfect. Yes, let's do the next step. Go to our home screen and let's do the go to settings. And for the go to settings, I can do it in a similar way. I always check here if there is really an owner to avoid any situation where the owner might be null, because I also want to avoid here to have null pointer access anywhere. And then I say owner dot, and now not just a switch, because maybe I want to go back to my home. now I say again a present dialog, and what I want to present is a new application settings screen, and same as before at the moment without any animation. And the last parameter, also here, that's false. Yeah, and now I've realized here really the present dialog, go to settings, put a little bit here because it belongs to this button, and then it should present my settings screen. Okay, let's check if this really works. It boots, I'm in my main, press the settings button, and now I'm within my settings screen. And the last thing I have to do is to handle here the back. So what I do, I go to my settings, go to home, let's do this here, and go to, maybe I also can name it here, back to home. And the same, I'm checking if there is owner and owner. And if an owner exists, I say owner. And now, very important, I created a stack where I put my settings screen on top of my home screen in relation to my application. So that means the application owns two dialog screens. First one is the home, and on top there is the settings. And to remove the settings, I simply now say a dismiss dialog. And also here, dismiss dialog. What I want to dismiss, that's the settings screen itself. So that's simply this instance. And also at the moment without any transition. Okay, also here, no slots, and the last parameter false. I want to prototype this, start prototyper, it boots, I'm on the home, I can go to the settings and go back, go to settings and go back. And when I'm inside the settings, I can follow up the same principle for the next level, go into a date time selection, go into a calibration selection, and so on. And with a back, I would go back, so I can build up a full stack of dialogues. And with a back, I simply do it in the same way, own a dismiss dialog with this, and I remove the stack. And that's a quite easy way of doing this stuff. And when to use such a full stack architecture, I give you some more details now, because when I want to add a settings screen, maybe I say the background of the settings screen, that's a little bit shiny with a transparent level, so that I really see a little bit what's below, like this. And then prototyping it, you really see it's stacked one on top of each other. So I'm on my home screen, go to the settings, and have the settings on top of my home screen with a little bit of a transparency. So I really still see what's going on in the background. And that's also a nice architecture if that's a design requirement for your user interface. Yes, and now a last thing, because I always said here, animation is not used at the moment. When I'm on my home screen and I want to show the settings screen, I also could use now here an animation, and for the animation we have already here within the effects a lot of different animation effects. And what I could use here, for example, use here a slide dialog transition. I just copied inside here. You can use it directly inside your groups, or you can create auto objects, or use also the default slide transitions. But I want to use an own defined slide transition. And I'm now able to say what it should do, and a direction. Let's say it's direction bottom. Let's test again. And now just prototype the whole stuff. And when I enter the settings, then it goes to the bottom. And now when I press back, I want to do it the opposite way. So I just copy the stuff, go to my settings, and say that's a slide transition, and that's my slide back transition. And it now says go to top, and I'm using this within the dismiss. And now I prototype if everything works. And I can say settings and back, and settings and back. And that's now a quite easy way of really stacking different screens with the dialog framework, and with the big benefit then you also use transitions to present or dismiss your dialogs. Yes, that's related to the full stack architecture example. Let's go back here to the agenda. And besides of the full stack, which is quite useful in stacking things, and you immediately will have the back navigation, I now also want to show you GUI architecture with managed screens. And what does I mean with managed screens? I now prepared here a small slide for managed screens to explain what I want to do. With managed, I also mean I want to show you a separation of logical parts of a GUI in virtual layers. And each of these layers shall be responsible for a certain information level. Like in this example, let's say here, you think that you have one red layer, and that's responsible for your main, for your menu, for your settings, maybe also for the boot, whatever. And then you want to have something on top, which might be used for things like pop-ups or other information layers, which always can be on top of the default screens. And maybe a third layer, it's here yellow, for system level. And maybe add here things like a virtual keyboard or something else which might be always on top, even on standard screens, but also on the next layer like pop-up or additional informations. Yeah, and the question is how to realize this. So each layer can be realized as a container. And now you think about what's a container. I want to explain. So a containers, that's a simple group which has only one property for its content, which should belong to the container. And when the property is assigned with a new content, the container can handle the transition from an old content to a new content. And what's important is the content, like your home screen when you add it to the container, it never can leave the bounds of the container. So it's really then just inside this virtual layer which is implemented by a container. Good, and this I want to show you now how to implement it inside Embedded Wizard. Going back to our application, going here to the unit application, and what I want to show you, I had here for full stack, I'm just doing a new annotation and say that's now my managed screens example. Yeah, and in the managed screens I want to do the same here. First, really I copy the stuff I did before and keep it in, and let's say that's my application full stack. I just have this still available, and now I'm in my managed screens with my application. Yes, I want to use also the same thing I have done in my full stack to have here really a base class and some dedicated screens. So the base maybe I can fully keep untouched, but here I want to have a different implementation for my different screens. So I simply copy them and have them available in the managed screens. Yeah, and what to do now? Inside this application, I also need the virtual layers, so realized by a container. And now I want to show you how to implement a container. To realize this, I go to the component templates, I copy one component, and I say this component that now will get a container. I go inside the container and show you how to implement. So just remove this part because it's not really needed. And for the bounds, container also should be full screen in our example. So we had 640 by 480. I just press refresh. I see then that's my container. That these are the bounds of the container. So everything I put inside cannot leave the bounds. What to do now? I told you in the slides a container would have a simple property which is defining the content. Yeah, let's do this. I just add a property, and this simple property would say it's the content. And the content, what's now the content of a container? It's not an integer. It's something I really can put in. And I would say I only can put screen base inside. By default, it's null, so nothing is assigned. And what I want to do is when I assign a new content to the container, then the container should present it. And how to present? It's in the same way as before for the full stack application. I just would say this switch to dialog, because the container should mainly only contain one dialog at a time. And what I want to add here now, it's really this new content. And I only want to do this if this new value, it's not null. What I'm typing here. Okay, so I switch to dialog for this new value, and at this example now also without any transition. So as I have shown before, you easily can add here your own transitions, and then also within a container you can have transitions to switch from one screen to another using the dialog framework. Yeah. And else, so that means if the value is equals null, so that means you want to remove everything from the container, then I simply say dismiss dialog, because there is nothing to add. It's just the dismiss, and the dismiss which I want to add, let's do it correctly. I do it before because here I remember what I had already. That means if value equals null, so if I assign a null value, then I dismiss my previously stored content, and then also here at the moment without any transition. And correct my code below. So that means, yeah, that's already correct. And if there is anything assigned which is not null, then I switch to dialog. Or now I can, yeah, that works. That should work. And now I have a container. I can assign a content, and it will be added directly to the container. Okay, I'm closing the container here. Going back to my application. Inside the application, I now no longer need this present dialog. I just remove it and refresh, and I see nothing is in. What I want to add now is my container. And I can do this easily by just go to the browser, say here I want to have a container, and it's my application container, and I simply can drag and drop an instance of the container. You see already the bounds here. It's now inside, and here you see that's my container. Yes, I have a container inside, and for the container I also can assign a value to its content. So I have here content, and I would be able to say content is new application home screen. And I'm sorry, what I've done here, content, it's new application. Yeah, let's do a revert. Let's do it here. So container content becomes new application. And I have here my home screen 1. And I still have a mistake here. Let me check what does it mean to class boot screen. Oh, I did here really a mistake inside my container. So let's go to my container. I said it's boot screen. It's not boot screen. That was a mistake by my side. It's a screen base. This I want to have as a base for all of my containers. And going back, you immediately see that the container now has an application home screen. I assigned it to the content and it's presented. Yes, so that's the way I can add something directly to the container. But with my example, I said manage screens, and now I want to manage all the content in a quite easy to use way. And what's important, I may want to make it accessible by any place from the whole user interface application. Doing this, I will refer to the last masterclass episode where Manuel talked about the device integration. And the same thing I want to use here. So with the managed screens, I also want to introduce here now a device integration part. And inside my new device, that's an auto object which is accessible from everywhere. So there is only one instance of this auto object at a time. And that's typically used also for the interface to my device. I will remove this here. Also, all these legends are not needed. And now I say I have a simple property inside my device, which is my current screen. In this current screen, it should be of type application screen type. By default, it's undefined. And I can also update this stuff from update current screen. Yeah, when I do this, for sure it's not an integer value which I assigned. It's then really this type. I also can update this from middleware side. That's perfectly. So that means middleware can get knowledge about what's the current screen and also can define which screen should be presented. That's maybe necessary to switch from a boot to a home screen. But be careful with such things because you want to have a clear separation between middleware and user interface. Okay, what I did here in the device class, I have a property current screen. That's now accessible from my middleware and also from the user interface. This device class, as Manuel has shown you on the last masterclass episode, that can be always directly accessed, but it also will be removed by the garbage collector when it's no longer needed. To avoid this part, I simply make a reference to it from my application, and I say here that's a variable of type application device class, and by default I assign my auto object. So I have it always available here. And the next thing I want to do now, I have inside my device class my current screen. I want to react on any change of this current screen property in my device class. And to do this, I simply now make it in a quite easy way. I add a slot method where I say on screen changed. And this I just connect here in my init as an attach observers. One moment, attach observer with the slot to reference of device of application device current screen. Yeah, that's how I can do this. So I attached the slot to a reference of device current screen. What happens when the device current screen changes? The slot is called. But I should not forget to have the initial state and to reach here a call of a slot on an initial state. I just say post signal with my slot, so it's called at least once on the init to get the default value. And then go to our on-screen changed slot here, and what I can do here, I simply can react on the current value in my device current screen. So I say here switch application device current screen, and in the switch case never forget the default, and then I say case application screen type boot. What I want to do here, I want to do something with the boot screen. So I want to assign now anything which is new application boot screen. And I use the boot screen one because this I want to manipulate for my new example here. Yeah, and how to assign this? I would say if boot, then my container dot content becomes application boot screen 1. And the same I want to do also for the screen type home and for the screen type settings, and then I just assign here a new home or a new settings screen. That's all. And if nothing happens, you also can say there should become then an error screen or something else. But that's how I can manage it. If I refresh the whole stuff, I see at the moment nothing, because device current screen is undefined at the beginning. What I can do, either here within the init, I now say that it becomes boot, or I do it directly inside my device and say here the default value is boot, or it can be updated from a middleware side to say that with update current screen the value was changed to boot. Yeah, going back to the application, I see that the boot screen is immediately visible. Also when I prototype, it will work, so it will show the boot screen. Yeah, let's remove these old boot screens, because what I did here, I created boot screen 1, home screen 1 and settings screen 1. Let's go into the boot screen 1. That's in principle the same like before. I just went to change a little bit here the boot, and let's say also the boot might have here a little bit different background color, just to have a differentiation between the different applications. The effect, that's the same, and then within the go to home, I don't use now directly this switch to dialog like in my full stack architecture. I simply can say in a managed architecture, I have a managed way via the device class, That's application device current screen, and this becomes application screen type home. So that's now a same kind of state machine like I did in the first example with the all-in-one architecture, but in a better managed way, and it also allows me to manage quite huge and complex applications with a very simple assignment of simply one new enumeration type. Yeah, what will happen here as soon as I prototype now my application, it boots up and it switches to my home. Then let's go to my home screen. Also give him a little bit different color to have a differentiation. Make a little bit of, red, that's fine. Same here. I open this one, I have the settings. When I want to go to settings, it's not needed to do any present dialog. I also can simply say here, application device current screen becomes application screen type settings. Yeah, and let's do a correct assignment here. That's all I have to do now here for the settings. And in principle, the same inside the settings. Let's do this, go back to my unit, enter the settings screen 1. Also, let's do here something a little bit less transparency maybe, or at least here no transparency, because I want to have this full stack. I only have one instance at a time in the container. And within my back, I just do the same here and say it's going back to my home. Transitions is not needed here. Also for the home screen, transition I can remove. And when I prototype the whole stuff, I'm booting, I'm now within my home, and with settings I can present the settings, and with back I go back. What's now some difference here in this managed screen approach, I really have a container dealing here with one instance of a screen, so it means there is either the home or the settings instantiated, maybe during a transition for a short time, both, but then garbage collector is removing one. Take a look on the memory usage window. Make it a little bit bigger. And also here you see you have an application in, you have an home screen 1 in, that's currently active. I go to the settings, I have a switch here, and then I have in my settings screen and my application home screen now is removed by the garbage collector. And that's my memory behavior of the managed screens approach. Okay, that's now related to placing here different screens into one container. What I told you that we can work with the containers also with virtual layers. And now I want to show you how to realize this with the example of a pop-up. To do this, I simply have to define a second layer. And a second layer, this I can simply do by a second container. So that's my container. And here I would say that's a screen container, because the property only accepts screen. Oh, simply can stay on container, because then we put in everything which is derived from base screen to cover here also the full screen stuff. Good. Inside my application, I have here my container. What I can do with this container, I simply copy paste it and I have a second container. And you already see here, you define the set order, which means that the container 1 is on top of my container, and give them a proper name and say here that's my screen container, and the second one, it's my pop-up container. And I typically prefer to put all visual parts more to the top, that I really can see what is the set order of my background, of my screen container, and of my pop-up container. And now I want to show how to present a pop-up inside the pop-up container. For the managed screens approach, I want to do it in the same way like for the screen itself. So I go back to the device class, and here I want to add a second property. And this I simply can put now from the device property, put it in here, and say that's my current pop-up. Also here, yes, I want to have a defined type. So therefore I go back to the application first. Like for the screen type, I also define now a pop-up type. Let's write with capital P. Go inside, stay with the undefined, and then the confirmation type, or that's then an decision pop-up, or maybe an warning pop-up, or whatever you need. Let's say now in our device class that the current pop-up, that this belongs to the application pop-up type, and by default that's undefined. And same here, you can update the property from the middleware with update current pop-up. And also here in this method, it's not an integer, it's really this type. And I just copy it in here, and I say the new value is of this type. That's it. I have now a current pop-up property in my device class, and within my application I can react on this. And I will do it in simply the same way like we have done for the screen changed. I copy my method and say on pop-up changed. This I use in the same way in the init method. Attach observer for on pop-up changed, reference to my application, or what I have done here, reference to application device current pop-up, and also post signal on pop-up changed to call the slot once after initialization and get the current value of device current pop-up. Yeah, and now if the type is application pop-up type, confirmation, let's do a confirmation pop-up, and then it's not our screen container, it's our pop-up container content, and it belongs to him. What does it belong to? Let's create a pop-up. And the pop-up, it also should be derived from the base screen, so I make Control Shift and drag and drop, and just have here my confirmation pop-up. Yeah, make this a little bit bigger to have more space for different screens. And let's say that's my confirmation pop-up. What should be done in the confirmation pop-up? Let's bring here some color, also some black with some transparency, and it should be really on top of each other. And add here now in addition one button. Let's go here to the widgets, one push button, and let's say here this push button is named confirm, and on confirm I'm calling a slot, and it means it's close pop-up. And for sure, in addition to the close pop-up, you also can do some other stuff on confirmation. So on confirm, let's say here on activate, it's my close pop-up. And I just show you how to really remove the pop-up itself and not what to do with the middleware to confirm something. And to remove the pop-up, I simply say here application device current pop-up becomes application pop-up type undefined, and this means I will remove the pop-up. Yeah, in addition to this, I also want to show something on the pop-up just to make it a little bit more nice, which should be quite fast. So I just bring in here some filled rectangle, give them a little bit of a color for the background, and put in here a little bit of a text. And let's say the text is with a font, a bigger font, and it just says confirm this pop-up. Yeah. Now when the user presses confirm, the close pop-up slot is called. It just says that my device current pop-up becomes undefined, and I want to copy it and also want to show you how to bring a pop-up. And to realize this, I go into my home screen, and let's say within the start I want to show you this part. I copy my close pop-up, put it in here, and just say that's an open pop-up slot. It will be called with the start in the on activate, and says that on open it's pop-up type confirmation. Now let's prototype the whole stuff. What should happen when I press start? For sure you can start some middleware interaction, something else, but maybe before you start you want to have any pop-up to inform any safety instructions, whatever, and later dismiss the pop-up. I'm prototyping the whole stuff. I see now there is my start. Can remove here this one. When I press start, I made a mistake here. Let's see where it's a mistake. Yeah. I want to present an application confirmation pop-up. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. Yeah, and if anything else, then I would say that my application content equals null, so I'm removing the content from the pop-up container. Prototyping again. I'm booting. I'm within my home screen. For sure I still can say here settings or back, and I can start and have a confirmation pop-up on top of my screen behind. If I confirm, it's gone. If I start, it's coming again. What's important now? Within this pop-up layer, currently I do not cover all the user interaction events, so I do not cover at this moment all my touch events. So I simply can touch to the next layer, can touch on the settings button, and can see that in the background also the settings will work. Why I want to show you this? Because I can demonstrate with the managed screens approach. Now the current screen device property also can be changed during the pop-up is shown, and it can change in the background the presentation of your current screen. If you want to avoid this, to click through, I also can show you how to realize this. You simply go to your confirmation pop-up and you put a related event handler, like a simple touch handler, covering here the whole screen, and it should do nothing. What's important, that it really is below any other thing consuming the events, like the push button, and it should assign here any slot, and it's a simple do nothing slot. And this one I assign to my simple touch handler within the on press. So nothing will be done, it will be consumed and does not go to the screen below. Prototype the whole application, booting, home. I'm starting with the confirmation and settings. I'm clicking now here on the settings. It does no longer work. It does work because on the double click, I'm sorry, I did not really remove this. That means the max strike count here I can increase, and then also on double click it will not react. Yeah, that's it now to my different applications I've shown you for the architectural things of, let's remember, all-in-one, handle all parts of the GUI within a single group. And to remember what I have shown you here, that's putting all the different members for your user interface into the root application and just take care on managing visibility and the enable state. Very simple and very fast to implement for not so complicated user interfaces, and therefore it's quite a good approach. As soon as it gets more complex, you can think about full stack or even the managed screens. The full stack, it's very useful if from the design point of view you have to see through your dialogues you put on top, so like I've shown you with the semi-transparency. And it's also very useful to have an immediately backtracking, so that means stacking all the stuff one onto each other and then going back. And the managed screens approach, that's a more sophisticated way. Here you can use this virtual layer concept with the containers. And for sure, instead of simply exchanging one screen inside a container, you also can use a full stack or even an all-in-one for a container, or the all-in-one into one screen you're putting into one container. So you can really also build up a mix-up of all these GUI architectures. Yeah, I hope this really demonstrates you how to use Embedded Wizard to build up your own user interface and which typical architectures you can use here. Yeah, thank you. And now let's answer your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So far, so good. Now let's come to the questions part. One attendee wants to know, could you please explain in which cases the middleware can directly influence the current screen?
Well, yes, that's an interesting question. So how can the middleware get an influence? In principle, always with this managed screen approach. But I want to avoid this, so do not really control here the screens directly from middleware side, because on a good design you want to have an abstraction, so the middleware should not really know how a data is presented, and that would allow to switch the presentation of the data prepared by the middleware in fully different ways, just based on the design of the user interface. Yeah, but when to do this? For example, if you want to be here prepared for critical systems and on the user interface, you have always dynamic memory allocation. And then let's say you have a system with really less memory and there might be any critical situation where you get out of memory. That means you can store the current screen always on a change on middleware side, and whenever such a situation happens, you can fully destroy the user interface, instantiate the whole user interface again. After instantiation, the user interface will read from middleware the current screen and will display exactly the same data as before. A second way, when the middleware can influence here directly the current screen, then it belongs, and this I want to show you inside the embedded wizard again. It's really this pop-up stuff. So that means also for the pop-ups, I added here the device class, and a pop-up can be fired either by the GUI itself or by the middleware. Let's say you open something of your device, any cover, and then you want to inform the user that the cover stays open, and then middleware directly can fire a pop-up.
The second question is, how can I implement the back navigation on the managed screens architecture?
Yes, how to implement the back navigation? That's really a good question. So I explained already that within the full stack approach, that's quite easy because with the stacking, you just remove the top level and you immediately get the back navigation. Now, how to do this with the managed screens? So for sure, the idea is that with the current screen, you always have to switch between one and another screen in the same layer. That's a quite lean approach to keep less objects in memory as possible. Now, to track here a back navigation, I always would introduce here an additional stack handling now the back order of the screens. And for this, you either can implement it via an array where you just manage the index where you're currently in, or you just then use a linked list and define an own structure to know what's your back navigation structure containing here the screen and maybe also some other parameters like what's currently focused in the screen and so on.
Yes, Rudolf, we're coming to the last question. And this one is, what shall I do when a status bar shall always be shown on top of the screens?
Yeah, also interesting question. So you want to show a status bar which is always on top of my screens. Yeah, when we stay at this managed screens approach, let's go to the application. So you want to have a status bar on top of the screen, but maybe below the pop-up container itself. How to do this? In a quite simple way, I just want to add here another view, which should represent here my navigation bar. Just give them some color, which maybe is quite dark. And that's our navigation bar. And it should now be from the set order between the screen container and the pop-up container. Or put all of the visual parts on top. Yeah, that will show now to prototype the whole stuff. You have here the navigation bar. It still is now on top of the main home screen. And when you press settings, it's still on top of the settings screen. And going back, when you make here a confirmation pop-up, then the pop-up is on top of this bar. But really to see this, I will go to the settings screen, put all this stuff a little bit below, go then to the confirmation pop-up, make here the pop-up panel a little bit bigger, and then you also would see on prototyping the whole stuff that it's between the pop-up and the screen layers. So go to settings, back, start, and the pop-up is on top of your status bar.
Thank you, Rudolf. Okay, that's it for today. I want to mention again that this will be recorded, so it can be repeated later on and can be accessed via our website. There you find all the relevant videos, also from the first part before our summer break and also from today. And also, as you are already used to it from the first episodes, you have now the choice between 3 different topics. One of those we will be covering next week. So after this webinar closes, stay tuned for a couple of seconds and give us your vote. Also, we're happy for your feedback. If you are interested in other topics or have detailed questions, we will be also coming back to those questions that haven't been answered yet. So via email one-to-one, as you are already used to that. And I wish you a beautiful day. Bye bye.